Right. So on November 23rd, I hadn't spoken to the president since the election. And in fact, as I said, since the middle of October, roughly. And it was a little getting awkward because obviously he had lost the election and I hadn't said anything to him. And so Cipollone said, I think it's time you come over here. And so I came over to meet with the president in the Oval Office, and Meadows and Cipollone were there. And the president, and this is leading up to this conversation with Kushner, the president said there had been major fraud and that as soon as the facts were out, the results of the election would be reversed. And he went on this for quite a while, as he's prone to do. And then he got to something that I was expecting, which is to say that apparently the Department of Justice doesn't think that it has a role of looking into these fraud claims. And I'd been expecting this because during November, Giuliani had been talking publicly about fraud. They can't come up with evidence of fraud. And he was basically starting to say, well, the reason there's no evidence of fraud is because the department isn't finding the fraud and we should be looking for it. And so I was expecting this, and I told the president no, that in fact, I did believe it was the role of the department, if there are specific and credible allegations of fraud, to look into them. But I drew out for him the distinction between the claims that were actually being made, which were more in the nature of people not following the rules. And I said, that has to be the campaign that raises that with the state. The department doesn't take side in elections, and the department is not an extension of your legal team. And our role is to investigate fraud, and we'll look at something if it's specific, credible, and could have affected the outcome of the election. And we're doing that, and it's just not. They're just not meritorious. They're not panning out. And I specifically raised the Dominion voting machines, which I found to be among the most disturbing allegations. Disturbing in the sense that I saw absolutely zero basis for the allegations, but they were made in such a sensational way that they obviously were influencing a lot of people, members of the public, that there was this systemic corruption in the system and that their votes didn't count and that these machines controlled by somebody else were actually determining it, which was complete nonsense. And it was being laid out there. And I told them that it was crazy stuff and they were wasting their time on that. And it was doing a grave disservice to the country. He then pulled out 2 sheets of paper and said that there was these graphs showed that there were all these Democratic votes came in the early morning hours and swamped them in Detroit and in Milwaukee. And he said, this is statistically impossible. And he wanted me to look into it. And I accepted the sheets of paper. I thought to myself that I thought I knew the answer to this, which turned out to be correct, and I alluded to it earlier. And then I told the president I thought he should preserve his legacy by fighting hard for the Republican candidates in the Georgia runoff and by educating the American people about the accomplishments of his administration. And at that point, I left. And as I walked out of the Oval Office, Jared was there with Dan Scavino, who ran the president's social media, and who I thought was a reasonable guy and believe is a reasonable guy. And I said, how long is he going to carry on with this stolen election stuff? Where's this going to go? And by that time, Meadows had caught up with me and leaving the office and caught up with me and said that he said, look, I think that he's becoming more realistic and knows that there's a limit to how far he can take this. And then Jared said, yeah, we're working on this. We're working on it.